So this is I don't know where to look at the camera in front of a computer. To you guys, it's a bit confusing.
You have your camera, I think.
So Lenny, camera 1, camera 2.
No, I guess most people see
Yes.
this.
Yes. Okay. Perfect. So there's many things that I'm super happy about the last 2 days and this presentation, Pierre. It's been a lot discussed, and I guess my challenge now, at least from where I stand within the sphere, I feel the necessity and the responsibility also to try to integrate and connect some of the nodes and discourses and ideas without blending it all into one common version of the sphere, but still I will try to concretize some aspects, even though you will see it will be still very abstract. But let's say that one of the challenges that I feel called for is the question of the interfacing. Like the sphere is a complex, multi-dimensional project, and there is an effort, I think, from everyone in the sphere to try to produce interfaces or entry points that are differential. So that means that there is not only one entry point into the sphere, but there is a care for the interfacing. So that's, concretely speaking, this is something that I have been concerned with from the beginning, that is since when we got the grant. Long story short, we got the grant. The first day I was ecstatic, because otherwise I was going to start doing fascia therapy again, like osteopathy, because with COVID, all my gigs disappeared. I'm not a performance artist. It's even worse. I'm a philosopher. So there's just not that much of a market for these people these days. And then the sphere came about, the grant from the European Union. And okay, I don't know why we don't see my screen now. We see the other image. Wait a second.
Maybe
I'm going to change it.
Are you sharing your screen?
And yes, just stop share.
We see your Word document.
Yeah, I want to show you another one. I want to show you. So, let's talk about the interfacing. After the first day, when we were like all ecstatic, and the next day I became very anxious. Like, whoa, what is this adventure about? And that little diagram is the first diagram that I produced for the sphere. And I think it still holds. At least it did its job. I'm much less anxious about the sphere now than I was. And basically, the mode of operation of that diagram is the sphere as. So the interfacing, concretely speaking, and that's something that I would like to open up for an activity, a workshop this afternoon, and probably it's going to seep through the game design week, is to allow for each other to list the sphere as attractor, as we were discussing before, sphere as lived abstraction. I have like my own versions, you will hear them, but here in that specific diagram, I try to formalize a little bit what these different dimensions are about as a way to offer partial and collective navigational tools. So interfacing and navigating the complexity of the sphere, trying not to reduce the sphere, but at the same time, for the complexity to gain in value, it needs to be somehow navigable, interfaceable. So here it's a very basic diagram, but I think it helps perhaps for people also to get acquainted with what the sphere is about. So if I start from the horizontal axis, you have sphere as process on the left and sphere as product on the right. This is something we discussed earlier this week. Yael discussed it on the first day, and then Joel yesterday really opened up the dimension of the process, so the Plenum Mode. So basically, for the sphere to work, somehow we need to assume the enabling constraint of proposing some sort of product, most probably digital, that will be, engageable with. But at the same time, the sphere is going to be that there's going to be no liquidity in the sphere if there's not an active, lively, differential process that's social, that's probably analog as well. So this is kind of like an initial tension between the plenum mode and the tech mode. And then on the vertical axis, the curation mode on top, sphere as attractor, and on the bottom part, the org mode, sphere as operation or sphere as organization. So curation mode, I think, corresponds to part of what Pierre was discussing just earlier. We have a process going on, we have people coming together, we have different ideas being exchanged. And then there is, for me, the curation is often, you bring an idea from a certain ground and you bring it in another context. And you do that work of seeing how, in that other context, that idea, that performance, that mode of engaging with the world will suddenly become something else because it will be appreciated differently. And that is often invisible work. It's a work of making things connect that maybe before they weren't necessarily openly connecting. So the art of conceiving the sphere as an attractor for its own becoming or for attracting new possibilities of becoming, I think is really crucial. And we have the freedom to do that. We have 3 years funded by the European Union for a research creation project. So sphere as product, the tech mode, super important, because otherwise I think we're never going to be able to hold everything together. But at the same time, we have time to do so because it's a research creation grant. So there is time and care for what I call the propositional or the propositional force of the sphere. Like, so the process, the proposition, these are things that matter, and it's where we discuss often the tension between the formal and the informal. The propositional requires a time of its own. And on the other hand, if I stay on that diagram, on the right, top right end, there's this idea of Staatskunst that we like because it's a German word and it's a mouthful word, and there is art in it and there is state in it. So the art of the state, statecraft. So the art of putting some form together that will be able to actually interface with the actually existing ecology of funding, which is mostly based on public funding. So part of the jokes here are like that we are artists in the art of writing grants for the most part. And that's something that needs to change up to a certain extent. I'm not against public funding per se, far from it, but the way that the funding structure has evolved has clearly run its course, and there's definitely a place for improvement, but it's kind of on us to produce a model that could then be adopted and modify the existing model. So we're not talking about revolution here, reform, but reform. Very important. We're recorded here, so yeah, reform. So there's something performative about Staatskunst, obviously. Writing grant is an extremely performative form. I'd like to thank Yael Cheryl, who's helped me tremendously getting myself into writing a grant for activating the workshops in Berlin for the next 2 years. Hopefully we're going to get it. And then between organization and product, there's something like skin in the game, which is a principle that we appreciate here in the Sphere crew, squad, collective, community. It's a way, or differential skin in the game, if you want to be a bit more sophisticated. But like if I put it in the worst, most aggressive version, I would say that if the Sphere is about circus and finance, we need to be able to long and short each other. So we need to be able to believe in one another, like mostly, but sometimes maybe we need to be able to short each other, which means to hold each other accountable if we have deadlines, if we want things to be operational. So there's something about making things happen, getting shit done, adopting models for organization. And then on the care, self-care, ecological care side, this idea that when you engage in an adventure like the Sphere, it's a lot about being able to collectively hold the volatility. So it's a project that, I mean, we all have an idea of where we would like it to land. We would love to have a digital prototype that will actually help circus artists to self-organize better and to eventually be able to raise funding in other ways. But the way to get there, we need to be able to open up the magical sphere of design, of collective design, and that means to be able to open up this shared ambiguity, shared volatility, and not, to dare to engage with the volatility of this whole creative process. So in that sense, the Sphere is very much an art project with its load of uncertainty and joy and anxiety. And if you go at the very heart of the diagram, there is on the top end the prospecting for potentials. So something that we were discussing yesterday after Jay's brilliant performance, it's like we like to say that the Sphere is about risking and speculating together, but I really appreciated Jay's presentation yesterday when he said, it's so easy to say that circus is about risk. And risk, the concept of risk is a lot about minimizing risk, managing risk. But what we're describing here with the Sphere is not just about minimizing or managing risk, it's about collectively prospecting for potentialities, which goes a little bit with the question of like, you have an idea or you discover something and you bring it in another context. That act of translation, of bringing one idea into another context, you have a sense that it might result into something interesting. But that thing is intuitive. That thing is something that we hope within the Sphere we allow each other to do these unexpected moves instead of behaving like we've been told that the Cirque du Soleil incentivize people in playing dumb, you know, because if you're in Cirque du Soleil mode of production, and I'm just quoting Jay here, you play dumb when the choreographer is asking you how you should do this act, because whatever you produce, like whatever idea you come up with is going to be Cirque du Soleil. So hopefully for ourselves within the Sphere and as an offer for the world that will be engaging with the Sphere, we hope to create a model for collaboration that is predicated on speculative generosity, but that is safe enough, that is a safe container that allows for people to actually share ideas or half-baked ideas and not being afraid of being stolen or just fleeced. So there's this idea of prospecting for potentiality. How do we care for that very fragile yet essential thing? And then on the bottom part of that diagram, there's the idea of the game of claims, which is the darker side. But I think, again, super necessary to be assumed directly. Because we're talking about money, we're talking about value. There is this idea of value comes through limitation. You need to assume that there's going to be choices that will be made. There are claims in the most basic sense of like, you want certain things to happen and you take the means for it. And you give money to some people for doing certain things, or people ask for money to do certain things. I don't know, like this whole part that is more about the organizational, but I like to call the game of claims, hopefully so that something dynamic comes out of it as well. So that was like my rough way of mapping, diagramming what the Sphere would be about, some sort of pseudo-proto-navigational board for navigating the complexity of the Sphere. And it came back to me last night as I was preparing for today because of that thing of Sphere as process, Sphere as attractor, and the modes of engagement. towards the sphere. And I guess it'd be nice as a collective aesthetic, collective ethic, to always remember or to be able to signal to one another when we engage with the sphere. Do we engage with it as a process, as an attractor, as a product, as an organization, so that we can maybe more easily communicate our expectations and desires to one another. So that's it, I guess, for this diagram. I don't know if you want to add or react on that. So I'm going to switch to, I'm going to go back to my Word document. So diagramming sphere as navigational tools. Oh yeah, so I'm going to try to explain. So I said I presented my talk as the sphere as speculative gesture. So what is a speculative gesture? I'm a definition minimalist. I don't believe in definitions per se, but I still, I guess, owe you an attempt at explaining what I mean.
Yes, thank you.
So speculative is a big word. Basically, for the rest of this presentation, I just want to try to thematize what it means to engage with futurity, to open up a relation, an active relation to the future, and to do it collectively. So when we talk about speculation, there's different understanding in philosophy of what speculation is about. I'm not going to go too much into details about it. I'm going to present my take on what speculation is. It's a pragmatist take, and it's basically in front of any situation to open up the question, what is the situation capable of? What are these people capable of? What are the situation capable of? And basically, there's an act of speculative generosity in trying to confer to the situation the power to make us think and experiment, to confer to the situation the power to risk and speculate together. So this is fairly analytical, but it's a way to engage into what William James calls precursive trust. Yesterday we talked a lot about the loops, the recursivity of what it means to generate and break habits. But at the beginning, if we need to start somewhere, we need to be somehow trusting that there's going to be a ground answering to the jump. So that's basically the concept of precursive trust that I can quote here. We can and we may, as it were, jump with both feet off the ground into or towards a world of which we trust the other parts to meet our jump. And only so can the making of a perfected world of pluralistic pattern ever take place. Only through our precursive trust in it can it come into being. So I mean, for me, clearly, and it's been fantastic to be engaged in the sphere, it's a space where precursive trust happens and where we can get high and choose our landing point, which is a fantastic quote from Salaranta and the Builder that I love. So being high, it's my part of the quote, and choosing your landing point is Ule's and Sarah's contribution to it. So that might seem very abstract, but it engages in very concrete consequences, especially when we start integrating the artful component to our practice. So for instance, the acrobat, etymologically, is the one who stands on his or her tiptoes. There is something there of an élan. What is that person standing on its or tiptoes capable of? That opening of something that is not taking risk is about engaging in a metastable relation with the context. And that is fundamental. And maybe it's because I'm too maniacal-depressive of a person, but I'm always afraid or scared that we will miss out on, or that we will neglect our capacity to aspire, or our capacity to engage into metastable relation with one another. So that's basically my message today. What I wish for the sphere and what I hope we can operationalize for ourselves is to never take for granted our capacity, our collective capacity to aspire. And one of my models for that is a filmmaker from Quebec, Pierre Perrault. He's filming documentaries, but it's not documentaries where you trap people. It's not a documentary mode where you try to capture the real as it is. He has an augmented understanding of what reality is about. So you basically try to create the conditions for people to be bigger than nature, to be like people are at their most real when they are actually becoming something else. But that's not so easy to capture. And that's maybe a problem for ourselves as well. What type of angle do we choose on ourselves so that we document ourselves, but in a way that actually feels real and not just like a degraded or a pale version of ourselves? So he's made this film called Pour la suite du monde, for the following up of the world, where he basically suggested, he went to an island. It was in 1962. It was like Quebec was rapidly modernizing, and this poet from Montreal felt that there was a potentiality that would soon, or like a window of opportunity that would soon be closed. So he went in the countryside, went to this island, and wanted to record what is the transformation going on. And then they had this idea of reactivating a ritual, a practice that was abandoned for 37 years already, which is whale hunting the traditional way. So he suggests the people, or like his crew suggests to people on the island in common agreement to reenact this whale hunting technique that had been abandoned for 37 years. And then he documents. Then he puts the camera on. And it's fantastic because there is like, I don't know, intergenerational dynamics coming in. There are different political discussions about who invented that technique. And then you have like 20 minutes of discussion between, oh, of course it's the French people. And then the other people are like, so the young people are saying, of course it's the French people. There was like the savages, the Indians, they knew nothing about nothing. And then the elder in the village, who is like, that setup feels like the only one who knows how to read, brings out this old book that is Jacques Cartier, the discoverer of Canada, writing about a technique that he observed as he entered the St. Lawrence River. So he settles the deal and says, no, this is a practice that was invented by the savages, by the natives. But all of that is super powerful. And once you're exposed to that, I mean, I experienced Quebec differently through that. And I would just say like, yeah, I love circus, and I see how circus can open up ways of understanding the world differently. And I mean, we're already exploring that together. And there is this part about game design in circus. Like your presentation yesterday was fantastic for that. How do we consciously create mechanisms that engages our own becoming? And that active, conscious aspect of setting up an apparatus, basically, and then allowing it to transform ourselves. I think we need that more than ever to counterbalance this tendency that we have to sit, or like to desire money, to work for it, and then to sit on it, like so that we protect our future, basically. That's the idea, like you want money so that you're able to navigate the uncertainty of the times. And the way that this capitalism game is designed over incentivizes behaviors that are adversarial, where we're all pit against one another, and clearly we know better, but we somehow need to be constantly reminded that this is a daily practice that needs to be transformed, habits that need to be changed, and circus, performing arts, and different types of art can play a role into reopening what it means to design games, social games in which we engage. So that's one of the points that I wanted to share with you. So maybe I can engage a little bit more into the question of the future, or the way we encapsulate, the way we capture futurity, packages it into value, and then value circulates and coordinates our behavior. My take, as you can see, is quite existential. I believe that if we intensify what we mean by our relation to the future, we might be able to also open up the way we capture value. So I'm very Deleuzian in that sense. I believe in the power of intensification, or as Deleuze and Guattari say in Anti-Oedipus, we need to interpret everything in terms of intensity. So intensity is another way of talking about our relation to the future, to expectations and contrasts, experiences that are packaged into a moment. And there is a tension here that I think is inherent to the sphere in its craziness. It's the tension between gestures and programs. So we need to engage in self-programming as a collective organization that wants to operate digitally, that wants to interface with actual ecologies of funding. Like we talk about money, money is a form of programmation of behavior. We need to tackle this. I mean, we need to engage with that. So I'm not trying to play gestures against programs. I'm trying to open up and play out the tension between the necessity for gestures, so intense relation to time and space, expressive relation to time and space, and then keep in mind that we're never just intensive gestures, we desire also to be partly programmable and programmed. As the great a great friend in Economic Space Agency said, sometimes we want to be treated by bureaucrats. We want to be in the hand of a bureaucracy because we desire that type of treatment and distanciation, and it's totally fine. So a bureaucracy is a program, basically, that has been set in place, and we want it to run properly. So I hope that within the sphere, we never lose sight of that tension between gestures and programs, and try to balance it out in different ways. So gestures, it connects with something that was pointed out by Geert on the first day, when we are interested in our capacity to generate novelty, our capacity to bring something new to the world. This requires intimacy, this requires specific conditions that are not fully transparent, even for oneself. So there is a mystery at play. There is a certain degree of opacity in the mutual indebtedness that relates us to one another, and we need to respect that. We need to care for that opacity, I think. So that's part of what I would associate with gestures. Gestures do things, they know more about ourselves than we know. Our gestures know and do more than we do. They are situated at the interface between us and others, at the crossroads of life and art. They make emerge through us constituent processes that go beyond our intentions and our conscious rationality. So I think it's important to keep that alive, that the gestures, they are passing through us even. You know, it's not like we're mastering our gestures. So that's the tension with the programs, because as we learn when we get closer to what it is to program and to code, coding is all about explicitation, full explicitation. The digital realm is a realm of full 100% decision making. So it's a very interesting enabling constraint. it's easy to want to play the analog against the digital because of that, because we feel like it can be extremely difficult to engage with the enabling constraint of coding. But at the same time, we all kind of feel that coding is the name of the game these days, that if we learn to code ourselves in a certain way, we're going to become something that we used to call a corporation. And I think that the sphere, or at least I think that the sphere should or is somehow a corporation. Or it's a device, an apparatus to produce incorporation of value. So sphere as incorporation or sphere as corporation it sounds maybe provocative, but I think it's something that we totally should and need to play with. The game of corporation is too important to be left in the hands of the financial class, the economists, and so on. We need to reclaim our capacity to self-incorporate and collectively incorporate ourselves. Which brings me to the question of divinization of humanity, which is this quote. I've heard Ulle saying it many times. At first came across a bit weird, and now I'm just like fully sold to it. So, because you need to be a bit crazy to engage with this sphere, you know, like what is that thing? And Ulle, one of the craziest people on the table, has this quote, I think, that helps him stabilize his his psyche. So he comes back to it often. It is not about the humanization of society, it is about the divinization of humanity, which I find is one of the most elegant definition of what it means to organize, or the will to organize. So to back up this claim by Ulle, I was reminded of the very, very last words of Bergson's last book, The Two Sources of Moral and Religion. So he says, mankind lies groaning, half crushed beneath the weight of its own progress. Men do not sufficiently realize that their future is in their own hands. Theirs is the task of determining, first of all, whether they want to go on living or not. The translation is not good here. It's to only survive in the French. You feel it better. To just go by, get by, or not. Or to get by or to thrive. Basically, that's what Bergson says. There's the responsibility then for deciding if they want merely to live, okay, or intend to make just the extra effort required for fulfilling, even on their refractory planet, the essential function of the universe, which is a machine for the making of gods. Mm-hmm. And that, I mean, I guess this year is just engaging with that type of claim. And there's always a cyberpunk reversal of that idea, that is, the machine is a god for making universe, which I guess is the negative space of that idea that the universe is a machine for making gods. So this tension between, yeah, so basically for me, the divine or whatever divinities are maybe to be conceived of as organizational powers that we play with. They're abstractions that we play with in order to make ourselves readable for one another. So programmable up to a certain extent. Which is a highly erotic process. So a bit earlier in that book, Bergson says that this whole civilizational game is highly aphrodisiac. So what does that mean? Here, allow me to read, because I mean I could summarize it, but it's something maybe that I want to formalize a little bit, because I mean the sphere is called the sphere. So there's this guy, Peter Sloterdijk, who wrote a whole trilogy entitled Sphere. The first volume is called Bubbles, the second volume Globes, and the third volume is called Foams. That basically foregrounds the climatic dimension of our being in the world. paving the way for a new approach of our environmental and cultural surrounds. So the whole sphere trilogy is profoundly ecological in nature, and it puts forth these virtuous circles of creative self-intensification and presents a world that is aspired by its own aspiration and constantly uplifting itself into existence. So the trilogy reads as a differential or perhaps cosmo-financial ontology of media flows developed under the sign of the fecund foam, that is to say, under the patronage of Aphrodite. Aphrodite in Greek comes from aphros, which means foam. It's an agency par excellence. So this aphrology, the logic of the aphros, of the foaming, brings us to interrogate not only the mode of procreation of gods, but also the origin of the human from the perspective of, I quote, the aerial, the suspended, the mixed, and the inspired. So from the animation of the sphere's perspective, the most fragile is also the most real, or what is vulnerable, the most valuable. And here next to me is Jen, who came up with this fantastic concept of schizofragility. So basically, if I really go too fast through this whole sphere project, there's the idea that in order for the uplifting movements to kick in, you need to produce safe containers. So what Sloterdijk calls processes of co-immunity. But co-immunity, if you only run with that side of the idea, produces conservatism and even fascism. But it's fine. I mean, it's part of the world to protect the things that we care for. But then, in order to make the spheres alive, you also need to conceive something that's much more aerial and fluid and liquid, which is this idea of schizofragility that runs through the spheres and that needs to be cared for, and which will eventually transform the very spheres that we have produced for ourselves. So it becomes more like, I don't know, a river, you know, like when you see the Mississippi River and its bank over thousands of years, and you see how it's shaping itself and transforming itself. That's closer to a process informed by schizofragility. So when discussing the political art of air conditioning our symbolic spaces, Sloterdijk likes to draw our attention towards a conception of ourselves as atmosphere designers and climate guardians. Beyond what might perhaps appear as an exceedingly light conception of the political, what is actually hinted at here is a way of conceiving of our intimate and collective capacities to aspire and conspire as something inherently fragile that should not be taken for granted. This is about the weather within and underground, a place where, strangely, the infra-individual and the macroeconomic tend to meet. This is what Brian Masumi actually calls the power at the end of the economy. So the economy as we know it runs on affects. We kind of know that by now. So how do we create the loops that will allow us to tap into these affective gains in a way that, again, will escape and protect itself from the way we're being constantly captured by the financial class? So the difference introduced by the theory of the spheres that I'm interested in here is that this type of theorization makes us more attentive to moments of upward movement, of excess and of free drift within the anthropogenic islands. And Sloterdijk goes as far as to say that without an explicit concept of upward movement, the original Afrogenetic activity of the human being is not expressible. So these ideas I find super important. I think they fit for what the sphere is about. If you step just a little bit outside of the climate that we're generating here in the sphere, these ideas become extremely problematic. That is, they shock with a whole set of self-programmation that we're entertaining within the left politics spectrum, basically what we call identity politics, which works on the idea that you should know already what the code is. You should know already that we don't say this thing, that we don't. And it's empowering because it kind of pretends or claims to institutionalize a series of behaviors, which I guess we need to do. I'm not like entirely against the idea, but I mean, at this point, like, let's give ourselves a little bit of love and remember that the upward movements are fragile and they can really, really be destroyed if we over-institutionalize ourselves into best practices and best behaviors. And that's what I guess I would call here conceiving of the sphere as a lived abstraction. So something of a common understanding that is always renegotiated, but that we're like kind of understanding that we're trying something here, that we're not just like, for instance, it's very easy to say, oh, the sphere, you are in danger of selling your soul. You're in danger of becoming just yet another corporation trying to make money off the poor artists, which is like, yeah, it is a possibility. It is a danger. But this is also the potentiality that we want to open up for ourselves because we trust each other, that it's not deemed to fail, that it's not deemed that we will incorporate in the most stupid forms. So that, if I formalize it in terms of a question, what kind of claim on the future of circus, of performing arts, more generally, are we interested in making? But one thing is that we need to allow ourselves to make a claim on the future, which is dangerous. It's a dangerous place to be, basically. So I guess I have a few more ideas, but I guess I can just share them on Slack or in a document. But basically, the idea that the future is a cultural fact. You can't take the future for granted. And more specifically, politically speaking, our capacity to aspire is a highly political question. So this is a point that makes Arjuna Padurai, an Indian anthropologist, that I think is really important, maybe to temper a little bit what I've just said when it comes to we don't come into the world with equal capacities to aspire. That is, privilege, if it's anything, is an easier access to the very possibility to aspire to something better. And it makes a huge difference. So I'm going to quote Arjuna Padurai here. So the capacity to aspire is not evenly distributed in any society. It is a sort of meta capacity, and the relatively rich and powerful invariably have a more fully developed capacity to aspire. And why is it so? Basically, the better off you are in terms of power, dignity, or material resources, the more likely you are to be conscious of the links between the more and less immediate objects of aspiration. So basically what Padurai means here is that if you grow up in certain milieus, you're in certain given conditions, it's going to be easier to actually concretize. It's going to be easier to trust your intuition and to concretize it in dialogue with other practitioners, or even just to have the money to isolate and develop your idea. You know, like all that we mean when we say check your privilege. So better than check our privileges in the sphere, I hope that we actually problematize what it means to entertain a collective capacity to make new claims on the future. So to make new, to entertain our capacity to aspire proper. And the capacity for aspiration, I believe, is a navigational capacity. So it's kind of like maybe where things loop into one another. But if you have the mojo, the drive, the libidinal energy to aspire, then suddenly things start making sense. So even someone you don't understand at all, somehow you're able to pick up onto an element that then you connect with another one, because you have some sort of authorization to aspire to make sense of the situation that you're in, which is, I mean, the dark side of it, the opposite side of it is if you're a colonized subject, you're basically being told from your bones, your flesh, your soul, that you shouldn't even try to make sense of things. You shouldn't aspire to connect the dots because it's just beyond you because you don't know the code, basically. So it's part of the sphere, I guess, to engage in processes of self-encryption in due times, but also to engage in decoding sessions for one another so that we can read one another. So it's a strategic capacity to be able to code and decode that I hope we can engage with. And I guess I'm going to finish with this quote. Yesterday, when we were discussing with Joel about loops and fragments, and it was extremely eloquent the way that Joel was discussing it. There's this moment where Amy was reacting a little bit, and she was like, but hey, we need to come up with a pitch elevator version of ourselves, you know, like that's, otherwise nothing of what we're discussing is going to work. And it reminded me of a quote from a novel, Staten Island, by Tom McCarthy. So here it goes. It strikes me that our entire social organism, its economy, its social policy, its civil order, that these things don't implode, that these things are held in alignment by a yoking to this notion of the future. And humanity, its gaze fixed on its apparition hovering just over the horizon, is thus herded along the requisite channels, its anarchic inclinations kept in check. Certainly, each brief the company worked on, every pitch we made, involved an invocation of, a genuflection to the future. Explaining how social media will become the new press baronage, or suburbia the next town center, or how emerging economies will bypass the analog to plunge straight into the post-digital phase, using the future to confer the seal of truth on these scenarios and assertions, making them absolute and objective simply by placing them within this future. That's how we won contracts, and that's how we landed the grant.
It is true.
So, that's it.
So, Erik, Emma has a comment. Emma, would you like to do that yourself?
I thought I'd just write them down. Well, no, first of all, I think thanks, Erik. It's just so inspiring to listen to you. I think there's something there, and I think you're trying to capture it, but it's also embodied in you, the attitude towards the material, the attitude towards the sphere, and of connecting. And perhaps there's even more things we can explore there with the way you are engaging with the material and with connecting it to the outside. So it doesn't, you know, that's one thing that always worries me, that it stays too closed. And I think that is like, how can we both be engaged and still connect? And I think the way you do it with theories here, for me, is a role model. I love to read the whole paper, and I got an idea when you talked about the Quebec quote there. There's a Swedish filmmaker who makes documentaries in a little bit the same fashion, and I would love to, Marcus Lindén. He should be invited at some point. That's really something I just wanted to add.
Hello, hello. Hello, hello.
I can hear you.
Thank you, Erik. I'm sort of working with another guy, as you know. I mean, I'm working with this this philosopher Bachelard, and who is sort of talking about the dreaming, or the dream, or not a fantasy but a dream sort of coming up. I'm working now and on a book which is called The Poetics of Space, and it seems like catchword, a very important dimension he's working on in his. I mean, does he live? Did he shape a sphere? One could say this thinking, and did that thinking connect to other spheres or bubbles, as Emma would say? Suddenly he writes a book about the home. Something which is in French is called se blottir, to snuggle up. I've they call it in English to snuggle up, and in Swedish there is the word mysa, mysighet, to be able and to find the immense in the little, so to speak. So there is. Because I think of it now, and when I hear you say, well, there must be, or there is probably a space also in the sphere where one could snuggle up and maybe reach these cosmic dimensions that you speak about by snuggling up. And well, I am not as you guys, and I'm not a specialist in new circus, but I'm snuggling up very much in the old archaic circus, and I don't know if that's a problem I have. I should go to some kind of and that's maybe my main problem in life. Who knows? But it's like it's like I'm sort of a victim of the standard romanticism, of the smell of the sawdust and the farting elephants and all that kind of stuff. So and going to the circus, and that's why I showed you Gilbert Pere's Banquiste kind of mechanics, and there is and also final kind of madness here. You're speaking lots about juggling, speaking lots about balance and things. Where are the clowns?
One last question.
The clowns. I mean, maybe they are balancing too. Maybe becoming a clown is something someone told me. Well, that's something you do when you broke your legs, when you can't balance anymore, when you are old, you end up as a clown, or what is the okay. So thanks a lot for all these. The madness in me is starting to boil here. Thanks, Erik.
Just an association, thinking about also bringing a softer skin in the game, because when I think to be on one's toes or skin in the game, we used a very simple way of doing this in the Sphere lecture performance that you saw in Gotland, where we were walking out on each end of a plank that was balancing, and as we walk out on this plank together, we have to move in the same kind of, we have to listen very carefully, and we have to feel very carefully what is happening with the apparatus, with the plank, but also between ourselves. If I'm going to make a move now, I have to be certain that on the other side, the person is ready to move. If the person feels like the person needs to go back, I have to be ready to counterbalance that. And when we then stand on the end of the plank, and we actually there, we can find a sense of course, it's a disequilibrium constantly being negotiated, but we have a sense of balance on the far end of each side of this plank. But here, after a while, when we've been standing there, we can start taking a deep breath. And all of a sudden, we're of course, we're disconnected in one way, but we're also connected through the apparatus, I would say. And we can stand there and we can all of a sudden relax, and we can it's almost like we're snuggling. It's a very different way. It's not the blanket and the pillow snuggling. It's the like a sense of a skin in the game that is actually based on listening, sensing, caring. And I would like to bring in that part, because skin in the game can be, and the way that the author of the book Skin in the Game is presenting skin in the game is very rough. It's almost destructive. But here is the circus skin in the game, as I have experienced it, is a very comfortable, trustful, lovely place. And also another reference that comes up right away, because we were, and I know you've been maybe diving into them a lot, Erik, but the Arakawa and Gins that I came to yesterday, they're about making architecture that can make us live forever. And because we always have to negotiate balance in this kind of architecture, we don't know how to sit, because it's not made for sitting comfortable. It's made for sitting so that we're always a bit unbalanced, so that our cells in our bodies is like doing some magic that makes us never die. This is a little bit of the same kind of being on the end of the plank. I mean, it's also it's a very that's a more balanced skin in the game, but it's still like being in the process of constantly negotiating how, and so this is just associations also, not from the sawdust, but in the Arakawa Gins architecture, we're definitely, almost all of us are clowns, I would say, as well. We're trying to understand how to sit there, but we will fall over maybe. But you know, I was thinking about these two moments right now, to also bring in care and listening and sensing and so on. My 2 cents for now.
I think in this example, maybe the source of comfort is also self-transcendence, because self is usually an agitating concept and anxiety-inducing and so on, or projection of self. So maybe, you know, being a transcendental body relieves you of these anxieties and so on, being more than yourself.
I have a reflection, Erik, or it's like 3, but I think they come back to the same one that you've heard me say like 1,000 times by now. And I'm trying to identify why I come back to the elevator pictures. And I really like the part about the social inequality of the resource to even have the time to think or dream of something else, because it's also a resource. If you are poor and if you're on the bottom level, you will never have the resource to even think. And we have the luxury of even visioning things, which makes it possible to see something else or articulate it, maybe. So I think I have 2 things. One is, could we have different colored hats when we talk about the different spheres? Like actually physically, if we want to play, I mean, could we actually go, can I do my audience perspective over here? And even if we decide that we don't want to have the audience perspective in the end, because maybe we can't even touch that thing, can we have it on the shelf then, so it's still there? Because I will never let go of the audience, I'm sorry, and I will never let go of the environmental aspect, even if it doesn't happen in the sphere, the reproduction of the spawning of the shows, because that's the reason I came into it, even if it isn't what it becomes. You see what I mean? But I think I come back to the elevator pitches for the low threshold of the vocabulary. And I keep getting stuck in the words. And since politics no longer seem to talk about the future, about what can we be in 50 years or 100 years, or we feel responsible for taking away our quick fixes, so there's no visions. I mean, there's only politicians and no statesmen, or something like that, like what are we? and the projectization of everything. So the future vocabulary of the visions, but also make them. I think I need the 8 elevator pitches to make people have the choice to be part of one of them. Because I can't grasp all the ones, as you know, but I can grasp maybe 2, and I can maybe follow one of the others, maybe. But if we can have the elevator pitches, we can lower the threshold of inclusion, because we're so privileged in having it or being included in thinking.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I want to add something to that.
Yeah, I wanted to actually connect it directly to what I cannot. I don't know who spoke actually. Was it Amy?
Sorry, it was me again, Amy.
Yeah, Amy. Yeah, I assumed so, and yeah, I just really relate to what you're saying, and it also relates. Again, I also want to thank Erik. It was fantastic, your presentation and all of that. I just want to add to that, to the last point of your presentation. When you were talking about the future, it made me think about Franco Berardi, before with the futurability. And also from Joel's presentation, he brought up this concept of Afro-nowism, which I was like, what? How did I not hear about Afro-nowism? Like, hello. And then I immediately went and looked and listened to the podcasts that he posted. And I'm wondering in some way if that might actually be somehow a key to that we are actually not thinking about the future. We are thinking about the right now. We are like, what we are doing at the moment right now is the sphere, and all of this like tracking of value, all of these things that we're thinking about, like the potentialities, the different communities, the different audiences that we want to engage in the sphere. Before we are jumping into that, like when we are really committing ourselves to thinking about the sphere as process, the sphere as an artwork, then I think we have to think about this nowism, and try to start from there, and to start to try to track value, and to start to articulate these very sensitive relationships that we are trying to build. You were stating that we already have this kind of trust. I think this is something that is in development. We're starting to create this community, and it's beautiful. It's a beautiful process. I just wanted to say that I think that we start to get in trouble when we're starting to think about this future and about all of these like people who we don't know who they are even, and yeah. So I think the risk, of course, is Joel. Yeah, nowism is a lens, exactly. Like I think that I wrote to Joel yesterday, actually, a private message on the Slack channel, because I got really kind of concerned about this thing that we want to reach out already with the sphere. We want to tell the sphere to all of these people that need the sphere, but they don't know that they need the sphere yet. And how do you even do that? Like with Amy, what Amy is trying to say, like, how do we communicate this super complex subject or idea to people who are so far like outside of this thing? And I wrote to Joel that I'm wondering what he thinks about it, because actually his suggestion felt to me, this lightness that he was suggesting was such a liberating idea that is like, wait a minute, before we are going into what we are doing right now is already the sphere, is already the what we're trying to achieve in a way, and if we can work from there.
I think there's still something to aspire for in terms of, future craft, especially when we have, this idea of the foam or the aerial suspension, and the risk that you have no idea, but you have a direction, but you don't know how the landing is going to take place. So there is this element of also what Pierre was mentioning about the entrepreneur that introduces the indeterminacy to the economic loop. It creates this vibration that can become a loop breaking element essentially, or like start a new loop. And I think Sphere also has some of that potentiality. So everything we're talking about is sort of like has yin yang balances that are valuable on both sides.
Can I jump in? So, yeah, I think that's really significant to play. Is that you don't play for the future not in any directly connected or predeterministic way. You play in the present, and the future is emergent in real time, and that's what allows a creative act without the weight of history, without the weight of future. That's what gives a lot of the agency. So I think that's an interesting aspect to bring into the game also. It is just exactly what you and Joel have pointed out.
I just connected to also Maoism a bit. I think the freeing feeling of the prototype, or like the prototype makes you maybe dare to act now in terms of the sphere as product. The minimum viable or minimal functional, minimal lovable, whatever, a minimal product that is possible to happen now, and in itself can explain, in itself is an elevator pitch because it is materialized somehow and a fact or a artifact. And it was Martin Q. Larsson who is the STEM guy who was present 2 days ago. He liked I think he's a fan of Steve Jobs, or he was bringing out all the time like, you are trying to explain this, like it's so, but it's also so true, of course. I mean, it's like the components. To put yourself there, thinking now we put ourselves there. Oh, it's not much more than this. It's as simple and as stupid as this, and that's what we're doing. And all of a sudden, now we can see. But now, then we want to do this, and now, then we want to do this, and that's the milestones, the prototypes. It's also a process of milestones. It's an archive. So this is such a good. I really thanks a lot, Yael, for bringing it up, because it's, for me it makes me want to act also.
There is just a footnote on this connected to the Boltanski Esquerre ideas. I just now read the back of this book, and they say that. This is a sociology of dystopia of our times. I don't know if I share this kind of negative way, but there is a negative tone and this dystopic tone in the whole Boltanski and Esquerre book. That's true. But what they say is that this collection form of capitalism they spotted or put together and made an ideal type of is leaving the future. I mean, it goes in the other direction. It's going to the past, mining in the archives, finding in what was the kind of value instead of prospects of future investment, prototype to scale up, and all that kind of stuff. So it's quite another mindset, and it's another mindset at least that is very different from the way in which the so-called capitalist businessmen are educated. I mean, when you give them an education, you give them to invest, to future, to have the prototype and look forward. And here you say that people are living on looking backwards, and well, just saying looking backwards gives it a negative tone.
Yeah, but I still think future is very sticky and it's hard to remove, because even an archive is somebody's idea of like which information should be preserved towards the future. So like whatever you're excavating is you're finding versions of what had to be permanent for someone's mindset. And even a prototype is a proto of a type that you are imagining for the future. So future is always difficult to exclude it.
Yeah, but I agree totally. What I'm saying is
the nowness of the future.
Yeah, exactly. Because there's something in it's scary to put yourself out there. It was more or less that it's also about skin in the game in one sense, also to say it's this now. I mean, of course, then it will become this. You can still be in relation to the future, but it's also to like show how stupid you are.
Well, any decision that becomes an act is scary.
But I think Stephen also has the right point. Like when the modality is a game, then this act of bringing something to the now, it becomes playful, and you can represent agency more fluidly and so on.
And I mean, game theory is all about predicting adverse behaviors from other agents. So this is the play thing. I mean, game design, as far as I can tell, almost plays with the play as an attractor to bring people into gamification. It's like gaming is not an innocent process, because it's the way we bring ourselves into action, also into possibility of an action.
It's very different. The game design is very different from the game theory, but it's also play manifested in structure through the affordances of those structures that enable play to happen. So it is that space, is that protective space of consequential actions within a inconsequential space, which gives affordance to that freedom. But there's this other thing that I think that was so valuable in what you said amongst all the other super valuable things. I was really quite overwhelmed with it, frankly. But was the vulnerable is also the most valuable. And this is this sort of steam in the air, or this weird substance that is always going through our fingers, and we're always sort of manifesting it in some sort of concrete plastic way. But we're having really a difficult time in sort of capturing the value of it. And maybe that's part of that deal, but I just thought that was really beautiful about the fragile is also the most real. And the most vulnerable is that value. And that's where the inconsequential space actually kind of helps that. And then you can make the future as the consequential space is in the future, perhaps, as part of that mechanic. But anyways, thanks for your talk, really.
Thanks, Stephen. I see, Shinwei, you're posting in the chat. Do you want to say something to open it up? I will try to copy what you're texting now.
I want to say to the people in the room, sorry, just that in 30 minutes, we have 30 minutes left of our lunch. So there's lunch time. We can still talk if you want to do it that way and be on soon, but there's wraps over there.
Well, maybe we could wrap it up.
We can wrap it up.
Yeah. Shinwei, great that you're here.
Well, if we have no time, it's okay. It's 7 o'clock in the morning in Montreal, so I'm very, very happy to have made the last part of your talk. I'm typing because I'm not as lucid as you are. But I just wanted to put in some figures of thought that are complementary or to Erik's lovely presentations. And I just thought of, as I was listening to Erik, of a few other figures of thought that may be friendly to this. And one of them is a figure called Alexander's horn sphere, which I leave for you to look at later on. But what's interesting is that it's a sphere that, as you grow protuberances out from what might look like a geometrical sphere, turns out if you keep on growing, as it crenulates more and more and more, turns out that in the limit, it no longer divides inside and outside. That inside and outside become entangled in a very rigorous sense. That's one figure. So there's some hope there, I think, in terms of engagement. This is, of course, just a figure of thought, but I believe it can be performed. Second is a coral reef. Thinking about Erik's comments about let's say the question of architecture and bureaucracy, and we think about the coral reef as formed out of the bodies of the cells. They're not from somewhere else. They are structured by the metabolism and the material of the very organisms. That's one, second figure. And the third figure is in the deep ocean, in the mesopelagic ocean, where there is no ground and there is no surface, there's no air-water boundary. It turns out, at least the ocean scientists tell us, that from the microorganisms' point of view, the water is extremely viscous. It's not something you just swim through as if it were void. It's extremely viscous. And in the absence of ground or horizon, the bodies of the organisms constitute ground for each other. They are each other's earth, in a sense. So it's another issue. And then finally, I want to repeat again Erik's lovely, lovely appeal to foam, because I think foam, Aphrodite, right, it mixes water and air. And that's something I think we can think about as well. Thank you so much.
This idea of how we become grounds for one another is how I can justify that we produce states, like nation states. Like, if there's one reason, I guess, is to gain a bit of that stability. It's super nice, beautiful what you said, Chinwe. I think we could wrap it up here.